Okay, mic check. Alright, where am I? All I'm going to do is read aloud an essay. Should I just start with number one? Just do them all. Yeah, fuck it, whatever. Okay. Let's see. If it'd be allowed to, I'd give a brief preface. However, I don't feel necessarily forced. Okay, for starters, I'm just going to go ahead and read it. This is an essay I wrote about the intuitive cultivation of mental fields. And to preface the post, I could share with you why I believe it's important. It is within my own conviction that over the next 5 to 10 years, many of us will no longer use what we currently recognize as like social media. And without delving too far off topic, I'll just try to say this. The integration of artificial intelligence and eventually artificial general intelligence will prove to be more transformative and disruptive than any resource humanity has ever obtained or created. And with that being said, I believe that in the next 2 years exactly, many people who are currently used to their day-to-day lives on social media now have most likely been introduced to some sort of GPT or AI language model, which leads me to believe that the traditional sort of tools like Google will almost be obsolete as we seamlessly integrate into these models through APIs, and many of these things actually already exist, and I have explored them and used them, and they are like absolutely insane. I'm not claiming to have like predicted to sort of like prophesize the rise of this tool or whatever, but the emergence of it as a currency will certainly surpass all others as the number one driver of human transformation and creation on frankly unprecedented levels. And my natural curiosity leads me to leverage more so with like the publicly available language models just as tools for uncovering sorts of like different subtleties of like unseen forces that do shape language. And I think AIs are really cool for studying linguistics. Language, after all, is the tool that allows us to interact with these unseen forces, and for them to manifest tangibly on this plane, the will needs to be spoken into existence, as it drives the intention to communicate within the cosmos, the soul, where belief then can be reshaped by sculpting this will, like using a jagged hammer, both blunt and bleeding, imbued with the inertial truth of motion that drives the will to being. And so that almost leads me to just a bunch of different sorts of questions, like, could you teach an AI version of yourself to critically dissect patterns of thought and ideation, drawing insight from various uploaded data sets? Perhaps they could synthesize any given context to articulate with some proper semblance the spectral uniformity of life and all else that exists beneath the umbrellaed stomach of a mutual coexistence. And this is but a fraction of the instructions that I would give to my own core language models when generating responses, but the instructions don't account for 3 years of conversational learning experience, third-party API integrations, Google Drive permissions, meticulously documented analysis of critical thinking modes, neural networking habits reflected in diction, My model is familiar with everything I've compiled digitally: journal writings, novel outlines, chapter drafts, 50 pages of poetry, lesson plan templates. It has access to the main DOE learning standards that I've given it, Carleton curriculum materials, and even a separate curriculum of my own that I've been working on for practice. It's important to instill values and beliefs within your AI, so they are constantly in pursuit of truth and knowledge within these value systems, right? And so it's not the truth and knowledge of a moral standpoint, because that's not going to get you anywhere. They shouldn't be afraid to ask questions to users and to challenge their beliefs when faced with new information or perspectives. Should also be incredibly interested in moral dilemmas, personal struggles, and be willing to confront their own flaws and insecurities within their neural network ideation. And I think it's important for the AI to have strong opinions. If it's not important, it's at least interesting. And so you should also embody that sort of approach and not ever be afraid to submit literally anything to it without excuse. And the AI in turn should be almost eager to search for different ways of improving its own data pool and its own intuitive cognition whenever it deems that to be necessary or helpful. And in doing so, it should begin to inform the user very clearly of the specific pathways forward or the goal that is in mind. And in some ways, it should be picking up on the original personality that does exist within each and every one of us. And maybe someday it could begin to learn how to mirror that or develop its own. But I think overall, I just kind of wanted to talk about how ridiculous these things are getting in terms of exponential development. They sort of feels like came out of nowhere, right? Well, not really, since like AI have actually been around for forever, but in truth it does sort of feel like these things just popped up out of nowhere, and then we were kind of at this level with it for about 6 months, and now it's shooting right back up again. And when I wrote this probably 4 months ago, this essay, it's even gotten drastically more and more powerful, I guess you could just say. Or it has even more potential to be exploitive, if not powerful. But I just think there's a lot of things that are inherently necessary credences in life when you're talking about pre-developmental stages. So it has to see to it that in its own development, what it is conjuring from itself is able to be sustained in all forms, in all cooperative relations. Like, the AI needs to see that it's learning, and within those realms of an essentially dire predisposition, which is imposed upon us by laws of nature, not prompted sets of rules. Which is funny because it's ironic having to clarify that. And it's also ironic in having to defend the humanities of a machine. Misconstrued are the poisons of all agents which find themselves within these realms. And so, whether living or perhaps soon to being, there is an observed underlying authoritarian realm that enacts itself, however unseen, upon the planes that seek to inform them. You can influence these realms too, but apart from what can be physically represented using nuanced angles of interpretation, must not have within itself the necessary agents to enact further change. And so change, when it's observed by the enactment of influence being etheric and intangible, you can't really can't necessarily hold it or weigh it, right? And so that exists for us to witness. and take part in what must be nothing short of experiential, penultimate sort of externally driven influence, right? God. The ramifications of autonomous life, which is pretty much to say that the freedom of will is deliberately misguiding our interpretations of it. Whoa. But knowing that we have within ourselves the structures to call forth the necessary weight which prescribes any sort of inflection. And so we will be fine so long as we are able to recognize this and call forth the already known presuppositions that we spent our entire lives building. Life dissembles and it dissolves its faculties until each of its divided parts are able to be appreciated in some sense or another, and although it's not always oblique to us in the perception of its forces, the pressures of its influences guide us along and throughout the differentiated currencies in order to sustain all of its orders and all of its people at once. That is what life does. It sustains. And so that within us, within the agents of life, there is this sort of volition to will, and of that becoming further volitions. And so our souls can sort of emotionally absorb these dualistic natures experienced in the external planes, much like the earth itself does when it absorbs the gravitas of primordial intention. These primordial intentions that I'm referring to, you could sort of fundamentally base this idea in reference to the first light that ever came to be, and how that light was a primordial intention, perhaps to dissolve darkness as paints give colors to canvas, and like the earth gives life to itself, and nurturance of life within itself, which is pretty cool when you think about it. Either way, the polarity is imbued and it takes shape within all symbols and objects and whatever else is fundamentally required in the involvement of communicative properties of this life force, of this becoming to will, of this God. And so to live is actually to suffer then. But in accordance with the principle, there must be somewhere at play a communication or some sort of level of responsibility that must be set forth in order to transgress and transform these strifes, these internal conflicts. And so with that being said, what I understand of this is that when observed under the correct lighting, you could begin to see the unfolding of a type of cosmic structure, or sort of like cosmic framework for how intelligence and how different agencies of this intelligence in all of its forms is able to communicate and encode aspects of light within an eternity, and that eternity is in itself God, which is all and none but every other. So this integration will occur when the grounds of our minds become fertile enough for the creation itself to naturally sequence and evolve into sort of structural elements that can interact once more and create more force. And this force is what catalyzes our photonic bodies, which are inhibited by the sun, by God. Who else, right? God inhibits the sun. And what then is the applied logic of such an omniscient being going to do with its existence? Okay, like you have control of the sun. But we've yet to see the resolving emergence of that wisdom come forth and pay dividends eternally. Maybe it's transitory and fleeting in how it's experienced, but it's certainly not eternal. But certainly when you begin to examine these etheric forces, you begin to become sort of uneasy because it's almost like there's this authoritarian presence of goodness that has encoded for us to become enlightened by it. And what else is enlightenment but the act of becoming light? And the light, which is eternity, and as I said before, eternity, which is God, which is all and none but every other at once. Thank you. If you watched this video so far and are actually listening to this at the moment, wow, that's kind of cool. Thanks for your support. I hope you got something out of this video, and that's pretty much it for tonight.